The school bell rang sharp at dawn, slicing the still prairie air like a judgment. Inside the little clapboard schoolhouse, 30 white children recited the alphabet in unison, their voices rising above the creak of benches and scent of chalk. But just outside the door, barefoot, dusty and silent, stood a girl no one wanted to see. Her name was Lena May, 8 years old, half white, half black. She clutched a worn slate and a satchel her mother had stitched from flour sacks. Her dress hung loose from too many washes, and her curls were tied back with a faded ribbon. She had come to learn, but the door would not open for her. Inside, Miss Eloise Turner paused. Her fingers tightened around a reader's primer. She heard the shuffle behind the door. She knew who it was, and she saw the school board man approach tall, hat low, contract in hand. "You know the rule," he murmured. "You teach them, you lose this." She stared at the paper, at the ink that owned her job. Then slowly her hand reached for it. Lena May didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She only knew that the moment she stepped onto the porch of the schoolhouse, the children inside had gone quiet. Eyes turned toward her, not curious, not kind, but cold. One boy even hissed like she was a snake. The teacher's voice had stopped mid-word. She'd frozen in place, gripping her slate tighter, her thumb running over the edge like it was something solid to hold on to. A gust of wind lifted the hem of her dress, and she lowered her eyes to the dust at her feet. Then came the words she feared. "I'm sorry, Lena. You can't come in." The voice belonged to Miss Turner, soft, regretful but firm. The kind of voice adults used when they'd already made their choice. Lena blinked up. "But you said I could learn." Her voice trembled. "You said all children—" "I know what I said." Miss Turner's jaw clenched. "I meant it." The door shut gently but firmly, and that was that. Lena turned and walked back down the steps, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet louder than any goodbye. From across the yard, a few parents watched. One woman, Mrs. Pennington, whispered something to her husband, eyes full of disgust. Another man chuckled cruelly. "Thought she could just mix in, did she?" Behind Lena, Miss Turner stood still inside the schoolhouse, her back against the door. The children stared. The contract still lay on her desk, unsigned, but not forgotten. She'd been given an ultimatum the night before at the church. Continue teaching, but only if she obeyed the racial boundary. A clause the board added quietly, without debate. Colored children, they'd said, belong at the missionary school, if anywhere. But the missionary school was 3 counties away and didn't take girls. That night, Lena's mother, Sarah, scrubbed her daughter's feet in silence. Her hands were rough from laundry work, her shoulders hunched from years of bowing to white clients who never looked her in the eye. "You were brave, baby," she whispered, wiping dust from Lena's soles. "Braver than I ever got to be." Lena didn't answer. She stared out the window, toward the distant steeple of the schoolhouse, toward the hope that had been dangled, then ripped away. But far from town, in her rented room above the dry goods store, Miss Turner lit a lamp. She opened her satchel and pulled out the contract. She read the words again, obedience, compliance, decorum, as if they were stains that wouldn't wash out. She thought about her own mother, who once taught freed children to read by firelight in a Tennessee barn, hiding from patrols. And she thought about Lena, her face pressed to the glass that morning, waiting for a future that would not come, unless someone broke the rules, unless someone paid the price. The next morning, Miss Turner rose before dawn. She walked through town before the sun had stretched across the wooden shingles. Her shoes tapped quietly over the boardwalk, past shuttered shops and slumbering homes. In her hand was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The contract. She didn't head straight to the schoolhouse. Instead, she stopped at the home of the school board chair, Mr. Aldridge, a banker, a man who wore his authority like a second skin. He answered the door in suspenders and scowl. "You know what time it is?" "I do," Miss Turner said, "and I know what kind of hour truth usually arrives." She handed him the contract creased, but unsigned. "I won't be needing this." His jaw twitched. "You walk away. You never teach again. Then maybe the right children will finally be worth it." And she turned, her spine straighter than it had ever been, and walked off before he could slam the door. At the schoolhouse, Lena stood once again at the porch. This time, her hands shook. She didn't know why she had come back. Maybe she hoped for something impossible. Miss Turner arrived just as the bell began to toll. Children filed in, quiet and staring. Whispers spread like brush fire. And then every eye turned toward the little girl standing outside the threshold again. Miss Turner didn't hesitate. She crossed the yard, reached out her hand. "Come in, Lena," the crowd murmured. A few parents gasped. Someone shouted, "You'll lose your position." Miss Turner turned. "Then they can have it." She opened the door and let Lena walk in ahead of her. Some children leaned away. Others simply watched. But Lena held her head high this time. Her slate clutched to her chest like armor. For days, it simmered. Mrs. Pennington organized a petition. Half the town threatened to pull their children out. Mr. Aldridge visited again, hat in hand, this time not as a friend, but an enforcer. "You're making this difficult." "I'm making it just," Miss Turner replied. "You ought to try it sometime." He stared at her, unsure how to threaten someone who'd already given everything up. And outside, Lena sat at a desk carved with initials of children who once believed they owned the future. Now, so did she, but not everyone stayed silent. Two mothers began sending their daughters alongside Lena. A young boy named Samuel, whose father ran the post office, asked to sit beside her. Bit by bit, the fear cracked. The air inside that schoolhouse changed. Miss Turner kept teaching. The board never rehired her officially, but she kept showing up. And eventually the school had no choice but to become hers again because the children didn't stop coming. And neither did the truth. Winter came early that year. Snow crusted the prairie roads by late October, and wood smoke painted the sky a faded gray. Still, every morning, Lena trudged through the frost to reach the schoolhouse, her breath visible in the cold, her hands wrapped in scraps of wool her mother had sewn from leftover cloth. But as the days grew shorter, something else began to shift. Anonymous letters started arriving at Miss Turner's door, folded sheets without names, some written in tidy cursive, others in a heavy scrawl. All of them said the same thing: "Stop corrupting our town. This is not your fight. Send her back." At first, Miss Turner burned them without reading past the first line. But one morning she found something else: a dead crow nailed to the schoolhouse door, its feathers splayed, beak open mid-scream. Below it, scrawled in red, "One drop stains the whole." The message was clear. That night, Lena awoke to the sound of glass shattering. A brick had been thrown through their window, wrapped in a note: "Not worth it." Her mother held her close as the cold wind spilled into the room, but Lena didn't cry. She only stared at the brick on the floor, her eyes filled not with fear but fury, and still they went back the next day. Miss Turner stood at the front of the class, her voice unwavering, as she read from Little Women, while outside, bootsteps circled the building. She knew some of the townsfolk had organized a concerned parents committee, and she knew they planned to vote her out at the next town meeting. But she also knew something they didn't. Lena had begun to write. At first, just letters on a slate. Then full sentences, then stories. Beautiful, painful things: a girl in a crooked house with a mother who hummed sad songs, and a school teacher who burned contracts like kindling. Words that made the other children go quiet, words that made even Samuel cry. And one day, Lena gave Miss Turner a folded page and whispered, "This is for them, all of them." Inside was a story titled, "The Day I Got to Learn." Miss Turner read it aloud at the next school board meeting, and everything began to change. The town hall was packed. Men in dust-covered boots leaned against the walls, arms crossed. Mothers clutched shawls, muttering about tradition. Mr. Aldridge sat at the front, gavel in hand, eyes like cold steel. They expected Miss Turner to plead her case, or at least to explain herself. She did neither. Instead, she held up a single page and said, "This was written by Lena May, 8 years old. One of your children now, whether you like it or not." And then she read. It wasn't long, barely a few paragraphs, but it painted a world through the eyes of a child who had never known welcome until a door opened, and who feared each morning that the welcome might be taken back. It spoke of chalk dust and trembling hands, of shame and joy, of the day she first heard her name called in attendance and believed she mattered. The room fell silent, some coughed, some fidgeted, but no one interrupted. When Miss Turner finished, she folded the page and placed it on the table. "She doesn't need defending," she said softly. "She's already telling the truth better than any of us." The gavel never dropped. The board muttered about procedure, about jurisdiction, but the people had heard enough. The story had carved something open inside them, something deeper than prejudice, something human. The newspaper ran the story under the headline, "The Little Girl Who Taught the Town to Listen." The article spread beyond the county. Letters poured in from as far as Kansas City, some offering donations, others just sharing their own stories of being shut out, kept back, silenced. And when the state inspector arrived weeks later to evaluate the school's compliance, he found a room filled with children of all shades, and one woman who had never signed a contract, but who had somehow signed every heart. He looked around and quietly said, "This school meets the new standards. Carry on." Miss Turner smiled. Lena beamed. And outside the window, snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, like pages turning. By spring, the schoolhouse had changed. The desks were rearranged not by rules, but by choice. Lena now sat beside Samuel and two younger girls from a farm out east whose parents had once kept their distance. They laughed together, shared slates, and sometimes argued over who got to ring the bell. No one asked about skin anymore. They asked who brought lunch, who got the riddle right, who could recite the poem the fastest. Childhood had returned, not because hate had vanished, but because someone had made space for hope to take root. Miss Turner, still unpaid, still unofficial, was now more present than ever. The townsfolk had stopped fighting her outright, not from sudden virtue, but from fatigue and maybe shame. A few still muttered, but others quietly began leaving warm bread on her steps, knitting scarves for Lena, offering to fix the roof, and something else began to shift. One evening, as the sun folded itself behind the hills, Miss Turner found a letter tucked into her lesson book. It was unsigned, but the penmanship was precise. "My father wouldn't let me speak before, but I wanted to say thank you for not giving up on her, for teaching the rest of us how to see." She held the letter to her chest, her throat tight, the ink smudged from her fingers as if the words had always belonged to her. That Sunday, Lena was invited to stand in front of the church congregation, not to apologize, not to prove anything, but to read. She held a short piece she'd written about the color of the wind on the day she was first told no, and the sound it made the moment it turned to yes. Her voice wavered at first, but then found its rhythm, like a stream finding its path through rock. When she finished, the room stood still. Then came the applause. Not forced, not polite, but whole. Outside, her mother wept quietly, not for sadness, not even for pride, but for the girl who had found her voice and the town that had finally learned to listen. That summer, the schoolhouse received a fresh coat of whitewash. Children helped, dragging brushes twice the size of their hands across the wooden planks while Miss Turner stood with a ledger, assigning tasks. Lena painted the lower boards, her dress splattered with flecks of hope. Samuel balanced on a barrel, grinning with a streak of white across his cheek. And behind them all, carved into a small piece of wood above the door, was a new sign. For every child. No board had approved it. No official had ordered it. But no one took it down. The town changed slowly, as all towns do. Some moved away. Others stayed and softened. The general store began stocking readers with more than one kind of child on the cover. The church added new hymns, and the preacher who once avoided the topic now opened his sermons with stories of compassion instead of rules. But it wasn't all easy. There were still whispers, still looks, still days when Lena walked home a little faster than usual, holding her satchel close. But there were also days when she lingered playing with other girls under the cottonwood tree, drawing with chalk on the schoolhouse steps, writing stories that others now asked to borrow. Miss Turner, though never officially reinstated, received an envelope from the state with a single line. "We commend your courage. Your student scores speak for themselves." Inside was her teaching certificate renewed. She hung it above her desk, beside a drawing Lena had given her. Two hands, one light, one dark, holding a pencil between them. On the last day of the term, Lena stayed behind after the others left. She looked at the empty desks, the sunlight casting long shadows on the floor. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked quietly. Miss Turner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Not unless you help it." And Lena smiled, not because she knew the future, but because she finally believed she belonged to it. In the wild places of the West, where wind speaks louder than law and dust, buries names before memory can hold them, there are stories that never make it into the books, stories that bloom in silence, in shadows, in the quiet courage of those who choose dignity over fear. This was one of them. It did not begin with a hero on horseback, nor end with a villain in chains. It began with a door that wouldn't open and a child who knocked anyway. And it ended with a town that finally listened. Not because the law changed, not because power shifted, but because one woman chose to tear a contract, and in doing so, wrote something far more lasting, a new truth, stitched together with ink and defiance, because sometimes justice doesn't ride into town with guns drawn. Sometimes it comes barefoot, holding a chalkboard slate. Sometimes it is born in the trembling hands of a child who dares to show up again. What makes a town good is not its history, but its humility. The willingness to look again, to hear again, to begin again. And in the schoolhouse of Bent Ridge, on a hill no map marked, that beginning was written not in the records of state, but in the hearts of children who learn side by side that courage isn't loud. It's steady, and love, when chosen over convenience, changes more than minds. It changes futures,